Welcome back, grade 12 accounting students. If you've just joined us, we're busy looking at paper 2 and some common errors that students make when answering the manufacturing question. A big thank you to our sponsors, Liberty. Also, guys, please remember, if you haven't already done so, download the Tenfold Education app and do check out some absolutely awesome videos on YouTube at Mindset Learn, right? Remember, all these resources are definitely going to assist you with your preparation for that final exam. Okay, so let's go back into year-end adjustments and let's focus on the errors that you guys sometimes make. So I was busy looking at, before the ad break, an example, right? I just started reading, so let's now continue. An extract from the pre-adjustment trial balance given to us on the 28th of Feb 2023. So that's my financial year. Water and electricity for the year, 35,600. Rent expense, 46,000. And remember, because it's a pre-adjustment trial balance, pre meaning before adjustments, right? I've got to first take into account additional adjustments or additional information. Right, so the additional information given, water and electricity is allocated as follows: 50% for the factory, 25% for the office, and 25% sales and distribution, or sometimes called selling and distribution. Note, included in the water and electricity is an amount of 1,200 Rand paid for March 2023. And then the next bit of additional information deals with rent expense. But I think let's start off by focusing on the water and electricity. Right, so going back to what exactly is the error. So what we find, students, remember, with cost accounting, with manufacturing, you've got to take the cost and allocate it to the relevant sections or the relevant departments. Right, so in terms of the factory, okay, what was the water and electricity used for the factory? So just to illustrate, right, let's say that's your business premises. The chunk of the premises is the factory. Okay, and this is where the production takes place. Okay, then you've got a little section here, that's your office, right? And this is where you incur all the admin expenses. Okay, and then finally you get your warehouse where the selling and distribution takes place. Okay, you guys with me? Right, now remember, when we are now drawing up the production cost statement, we are focusing on the expenses incurred in the making of the product. And in other words, all the expenses relating to the actual factory, the actual production. Okay, so obviously the office, sales and distribution has no bearing on the actual production process, right? Those two expenses belong in our statement of comprehensive income, or the trading statement and the profit and loss statement. So when you're now doing the factory overhead note, you're just focusing on this area. Okay, so what our focus is on is that 50%. Right. Now, often what we find students doing is they take the 35,000, okay, which is correct. That's always my starting point. And immediately they say, okay, I just need 50% of this. And this is the amount that they now show in the note factory overheads, which is incorrect. Okay, so why is this incorrect? It's incorrect because you've got a year-end adjustment, guys. You've got a year-end adjustment that you first need to take into account before you start splitting the expense into the various percentages. Okay, you guys got that? I just want to say it one more time. You've got to take that year-end adjustment into account first, right? And then split the cost into factory, admin, sales, and distribution. Right, so how do we take this year-end adjustment into account? I just hope that you guys can see my writing. You should be able to. So I start off with the 35,600. That's my starting point, right? Included in the water and electricity amount is an amount of 1,200. So in this amount, there's 1,200 that is paid for the next financial year. Remember, our financial year ends on the 28th of Feb. We still have to follow GARP. So anything outside my timeline or my financial year, I've got to remove, I've got to subtract. So in this case, minus 1,200. Okay, so if we minus the 1,200, 35,600, there we go, minus 1,200, and I'm now getting an amount of 34,400. Okay, so 34,400, and now I start splitting this. Okay, so I only need 50%, right? So this amount, right, times 50%, or you can just divide by 2. And the water and electricity for the factory, 17,200. Okay, right, can you see what I've done there? I've obviously taken into account the year-end adjustment first, and then I've split, I've calculated the 50%. Right, so how do you actually show this in the note? Right, because you're probably saying, but Mahesh, we don't have that much of space, right? Guys, you do have enough space. Always remember that even if you run out of space, and you shouldn't, but if you do, there's always additional pages given in your answer book towards the back of your answer book or the bottom where you can show your calculations. And remember, when we mark, if something is incorrect on the page where it should be answered, but we find that at the end of the book you've got additional calculations, we go and we mark that as well. Okay, what helps us is when you make little references or you have little keys. So normally a student would like to use like a little highlighter, right, telling the examiner, or a different colored pen, you'll find my calculation on this page or whatever. Just look for that key. Okay, right, so water and electricity, as you can see, I've got enough space here. So this is how I would show my calculation. I would start with the 35,600, right? So the 35,600, I obviously minused 1,200, and then I'm allocating 50% to the factory, 17,200. Okay, so as you can see, you're getting these marks. Okay, that's normally, or it could be a method mark, right? Maybe you went wrong somewhere and obviously you got one part correct and you could get that, right? But just remember, guys, if you take, or if you do what most students generally do, 35,600 times 50%, right, minus 1,200, you definitely not going to get this amount. Okay, and then you'll find you're not going to get the marks allocated. You might get 1 mark there, a method mark, and that's basically it. Okay, so please, yeah, bear that in mind. Okay, right, then the next error, still the same error, the year-end adjustment error. What I want to look at is rent. So I'm just going to, again, just make sure that no one's confused. Let's just remove all of this writing and let's now focus on rent. Rent expense, the rent for February 2023 is still outstanding. Note the rent increased by 2,000 Rand on the 1st of Jan 2023. Rent is allocated as following, right? So the ratio 4:2:2. And that represents the factory, the office, and the sales department. Right, so how are we splitting the rent? Obviously 4 plus 2 plus 2. So if you look at, right, as you can see, the factory 4/8, so that's basically half of the expense belongs to the factory, right? So 4 over 8 is the factory, the office 2 over 8, and the sales department 2 over 8. Okay, right, so let's now again, let's take into account the year-end adjustment first. Okay, remember this adjustment you can also find, they can test this adjustment in paper 1, but in this case can also be tested in paper 2. Right, so the rent expense, my financial year starts on the 1st of March, ends on the 28th of February, okay, 2023. And from the information given, the rent increased by 2,000 Rand on the 1st of Jan. So somewhere here on the 1st of Jan, rent increased by 2,000 Rand. Okay, so I can actually start with that. So January and February, obviously the rent is 2,000 Rand more than what it was in the previous months, right? Yeah, note the rent increased. I read that part. Rent is outstanding. That's what I was looking for the month of February. So in other words, the rent has only been paid, right? Hasn't been paid for February, so that is still outstanding. That needs to be included. And the rent has only been paid for this time frame, right? It's only been paid for 11 months. Okay, right. So again, take the year-end adjustment into account first. So let's calculate our monthly rent, right? Our rent expense given to us, 46,000. So that's my starting point, right? 46,000. And remember that 46,000 represents 11 months, guys. Okay, so from that 46,000, from the information given, remember 1 month's rent, right? January includes an extra 2,000 Rand, okay? Whereas for 10 months, the rent has remained constant. Remember, in total, you have paid rent for 11 months. So from the 1st of March until the end of December, right? For 10 months, your rent has remained the same. And for January, it's only 1 month where the rent has obviously increased by 2,000. So all you need to do in this case, I know a lot of you like to draw up equations, solve for x, but in this case it's quite simple, right? 46,000 minus 2,000, okay? And then divide that by 11 in order for you to get what was the rent before the increase. So let's do that. So 46,000, right, minus that additional 2,000, okay, and then if we divide that by 11, right, before the increase the rent is 4,000, okay, so your rent amount is 4,000 before the increase. Remember guys, if you solve for x, draw equations, you'll still get this answer, right? 4,000. And remember, we need to calculate what is the new rent because that is what needs to be included in terms of this year-end adjustment. So 4,000 plus the increase of 2,000, the monthly rent that we should pay amounts to 6,000. Okay. Right, once I've calculated the 6,000, where to from here? So with that 6,000, what am I doing? I am taking my rent expense, okay, right, so remember the rent expense, 46,000. I've got to now include the rent for February. So plus 6,000, right? Year-end adjustment. So remember, you take that into account first. Right, once I've calculated, so 52,000, and what portion belongs to the factory? So if we go to our information at the top, right, remember the factory is half, 4 over 8, right? So again, it's 50%, right, times 4 over 8, or times 50%, and the portion belonging to the factory, we've got an amount of 52,000, right? I'm just going to divide that by 2, and that gives us 26,000. Okay, so once again, where do we show this, or how do we show this? In our note, right? So exactly what I've done here, guys. So this part here, right? All I'm doing in my answer book, I'm taking 46,000 is my starting point. To this amount, I'm now adding the year-end adjustment first, plus 6,000, and then I'm multiplying this by 50%, or 4 over 8, to get the amount of 26,000. Okay, but again, guys, if you are running out of time and you write down the answer 26,000, then just tell the examiner, there's my calculation. Okay, the marker, the person that's marking. Okay, right. Okay, so I think we've done quite a few on manufacturing. I just want to quickly touch now on errors made when calculating break-even. I think before we do that, let's take another quick ad break. Maybe you want to just stretch your legs a bit, and then we'll move on to errors that students make when calculating break-even. I'll see you guys in a bit.